It could be someday that we may know it's time to get our house in order. Now, God doesn't appear to each of us like He did to Hezekiah ages ago and say, set your house in order, for today you will surely die. That is not God's way today. In fact, we do not know when our summons will come, do we? We know that life is uncertain. Some people will live at will leave this earth at a very short age. As Brother Steve Moore said this morning in Bible class, he was sad to be at the place where a young 8-year-old girl was killed in a car wreck. So it may come at a very young age. Or it may be that God will have us to be here for over 100 years. Brother Tillett S. Tedley, that wrote some of the great hymns in our book, Brother Bill, lived to be 100 years of age or more. And God blessed him with many, many wonderful ideas for songs to sing to the Lord. So we don't know. But when Hezekiah was told by Isaiah, set your house in order, for you are going to die and not live, it must have come as a shock to him. If we had that kind of message today, how would we feel? Well, I'll tell you how Hezekiah felt. He took it with tears. It said in verse 2, that he turned his face to the wall and said, O Lord, remember now, I beseech thee, how I have walked before thee in truth with a whole heart, and have done what is good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept bitterly. What is Hezekiah thinking? He might be thinking, well, perhaps I've misjudged my life. And if God is going to take me away from this earth now, perhaps that is God's judgment upon me for not being a good person. But we know he was a good man. The Bible records that he was serving God with his heart. He is one of those that we can easily and readily recommend to you as one of the good kings of Judah. But he wept bitterly, and that's how it might be if we knew that our time was limited. And it says that Isaiah, at the time Isaiah came to him, and he says, return to Hezekiah, the leader of my people, say, thus says the Lord, God of David, your father David, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. Behold, I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord. Now we're going to find out in just a moment what Hezekiah's affliction was. And going up to the house of the Lord is not some casual thing. Kings didn't always go to the temple. There was a limitation as to when kings could or could not appear before the house of the Lord. And we must remember, only the Levites could go into the inner sanctuary, and only the high priest into the Holy of Holies. But to go up to the house of the Lord would have been an opportunity to have made a sacrifice or an oblation to the Lord in thanksgiving for the fact that God had brought him back from the edge of the abyss. And here's the blessing that God gives to him. And I will add 15 years to your life, and I will deliver you and this city from the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend this city for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. Then Isaiah said, take a cake of figs, and he took it and laid it on the boil, and he recovered. You say, well, couldn't he have figured that out on his own? No, I don't think he could. It is a pure from God. God said, now, you're going to recover. And I'm convinced that if God had not wanted Hezekiah to recover, he would not have done so. Now, Hezekiah had a question for God in verse 8. He said to Isaiah, what will be the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord the third day? You know, people like signs, don't they? You remember that Gideon wanted a sign. Gideon wanted a wet fleece and a dry ground, and a dry fleece and a wet ground on 2 different occasions. He wanted to be sure that God was giving him the message before he went tracing off after the Midianites and chasing them down with only 300 men that God finally honed the army down to. He wanted to know. Many people in this day and age are looking for signs, aren't they? Yet the age of miraculous signs was one that basically faded away with New Testament gifts. I am convinced today that the signs that God gives are more subtle. They're not direct signs. They're those that we see in answered prayer. Sometimes we see signs in retrospective answered prayers. There are things that I prayed for that God doesn't give me a sign like some light from heaven like this, but rather it comes through the working out of events and circumstances. We may pray for a certain person to get well, and sometimes that happens, and we're thankful for it. But it's still, thy will be done, Lord, and not mine. And then there are times that we may pray for certain things to happen in our life, and we look back in retrospect, and they do happen. And we know that God has blessed us. But we're not given direct signs. But here's what God said. Well, this is what the sign shall be. The Lord will do the thing you've spoken. Shall the shadow of the sundial, obviously, Go back 10 steps or go forward 10 steps or go back 10 steps? Well, we might think about that. Well, what difference would it make? I mean, either way would be miraculous. Bill, I can imagine today the sun making a change to either go forward or backwards some 20 minutes, you know. And, of course, that's basically what that was inferring. The 10 degrees would be essentially like 20 minutes worth. But imagine today if the sun moved backwards 20 minutes. You say, wait a minute. It's the earth that moves, not the sun. Remember the longest day in the Valley of Ajalon when the sun stood still? Brethren, there are things that God can do that we can't even imagine. And by faith, I accept what the Scriptures say. But whatever is the case here, Hezekiah said, well, it's easy for the sun to decline 10 steps. In other words, to go forward. When we say decline, he's not meaning going backwards, but he means to go forward. He said, let it go back 10 steps. That would truly be a miracle. God did exactly what he told him. And he did change the sundial to make it show that he would live. Now, Hezekiah's troubles are not over. There is a king down in Babylon, and by the way, this is several years before the really rise of the big Babylonian kingdom under Nebuchadnezzar. There is a king called Baladan, the son of Baladan, king of Babylon, and at this time Assyria is still the dominant power. We are still several years away from the time that the Babylonians will rise to power, perhaps 100 years or so. And so he heard that Hezekiah had been sick. Now back in those days, kings had a way of keeping up with each other, Steve. They sent messages to each other. They would send envoys to each other. If one king got sick, another wanted to know about it, because you never knew. If somebody's getting sick, that could be coming his way. Plagues, boy, they kept an eye on plagues, didn't they? Because they knew that plagues were dangerous. So, well, what's the matter with this man? Let's go find out. Hezekiah listened to the messengers, but now Hezekiah didn't show very good wisdom here. It said that he showed them the treasure house, the silver and the gold, and the spices and the precious oils and the house of his armor, and all that was found in his treasuries. There was nothing in his house nor in all his dominion that Hezekiah did not show them. Then Isaiah the prophet comes to Hezekiah and said, what did these men say, and from when have they come to you? In chapter 20, verses 14 through 15. Hezekiah said, they'd come from a far country, from Babylon. And he said, what have they seen in your house? So Hezekiah answered, they've seen all that's in my house. There's nothing among my treasuries I've not shown them. And can't you just hear Isaiah now say, shouldn't have done that. Hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that your fathers have laid up in store to this day shall be carried into Babylon, and nothing shall be left. Now, this would not be the first time that the house of the Lord would have been ransacked. There's a king called Shishak of Egypt that came and also made some raids on the kings of Judah's treasury. This wouldn't be the first time, but this would be the first time that it would be totally destroyed under the king Nebuchadnezzar. That would come later, but it would be quite some time off. He said, nothing will be left. And some of your sons who shall issue from you, and by the way, the word son here is kind of an idea of sons and grandsons and great-grandsons. Sometimes they use those words to mean more than one generation. They will be taken away and shall become officials in the palace of the king of Babylon. Now that must have come as quite a blow to Hezekiah. Imagine he's been told you're going to get 15 years yourself, but this place is going to be ransacked, and some of your descendants are going to have to work for a pagan king. You see, it's like bittersweet, salt on one hand and sugar on the other. You know, we sometimes have that happen in our life, don't we? Sometimes we hear the good and the bad. And we like to hear the good, but boy, we sure don't want to hear the bad. Oh, I don't want to hear that. I want to put wax and mayors. No, don't tell me that. You know, we sometimes say that about things that happen to us today. Well, I don't want to hear about the bad things in my life. Oh, I don't want to hear about people's sickness. I don't want to hear about financial problems. I don't want to hear about the nation's problems. Just tell me the good. But life is not that way. In real life, we realize that good things happen along with the bad.